Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Zemo Partnership's webinar and panel discussion on the role of low carbon fuels in decarbonising HGV fleets. My name's Gloria Esposito. I'm Head of Sustainability at Zemo Partnership, and I'm going to be presenting today and supporting the question and answer session. So in terms of the webinar agenda today, I'll be giving you just a very brief introduction on really setting the scene for low carbon fuels that are used in HGVs and some of the work that Zemo's been doing. I'm then going to pass over to Hadyn Young, who's the founder of Rutland Forums, and he's going to chair the panel discussion. And I'm very pleased that we have a variety of great speakers today that is really going to sort of focus on the role of low carbon fuels in HGVs. And then I will wrap up at the end. So for those of you who might not be aware, Zemo Partnership is a unique cross-sector collaboration of over 220 organisations, and our real focus is on accelerating road transport decarbonisation and achieving net zero. We've been in existence now for 20 years. We were formerly the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership. And our members include major automotive manufacturers, including cars, vans, trucks and buses, renewable fuel suppliers and energy suppliers and technology suppliers, infrastructure, whether that be low carbon fuels or energy, local and national government, fleet operators and academia and financing and leasing. So we've got a really broad church at Zemo Partnership. And our work covers commercial vehicles, trucks and vans, public transport, buses and coaches, passenger cars, a range of low carbon fuels and an energy infrastructure. So we've been working with our members for a significant amount of time now, really bringing together different sorts of stakeholders to really provide a platform for debate and collaboration on not only thinking about low carbon vehicle and zero emission vehicle supply, but also that demand side as well. And we've worked very closely with government over the last 20 years to shape a variety of national policies, not only related to low carbon, looking at low carbon transport, but also on air quality as well. And we provide expertise on research and emissions analysis, looking at different vehicle technologies and fuels and infrastructure. And we also lead major activities and initiatives to really help overcome market barriers. And I think that's quite important in this discussion today. So some of the work that we've been doing in the renewable fuels landscape is a few years ago, we did a piece of work looking at the market opportunities to decarbonise heavy-duty vehicles using renewable fuels, and that was very important in influencing government policy and looking at different opportunities, especially for high blend renewable fuels. We've done significant amounts of work looking at life cycle analysis of different types of low carbon fuels, and our recent piece of work looked at the well-to-wheel greenhouse gas and energy performance of hydrogen vehicles. We looked at several types of ways of producing hydrogen, their use in hydrogen fuel cell and ICE vehicles. We've also done work on trying to influence different areas of policy. Quite importantly, we did a piece of work last year on a proposal for a renewable fuel incentive, specifically for low carbon liquid fuels, and we presented that to government and Treasury. Most recently, we've produced a renewable fuels guide, specifically focused on heavy duty vehicles, and we've been running our renewable fuels assurance scheme for the past 2 years that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. So just setting the scene here, I'm sure everybody's familiar with the climate emergency that we're in at the moment. It's obviously a very important issue, one of the key environmental issues and society issues that we're facing today. But this is particularly challenging for road transport and requires significant greenhouse gas reduction over the next decade. When we focus on HGVs, they contribute 19% of road transport greenhouse gas emissions, but the largest contribution is those from those truck operators that are doing long haul duty cycles, primarily because of their high mileage and high volumes of fuel. The UK government has set a target for achieving net zero by 2050 with an interim economy-wide target of 78% by 2035. Last year, they published their net zero emission strategy. In terms of road transport emissions, they have to drop in a region of 80% by 2035 to meet net zero. So a lot of work needs to be done. And Zemo has undertaken some analysis over the last year to really focus on heavy duty vehicles and non-road mobile machinery and trying to understand the change in diesel demand over the next 30 years, taking into account the transition to zero emission technologies. And we've taken into account the government's announcement of the end of sales of non-tailpipe ICE trucks, whether that be rigid or Arctic, so that those new sales of electric vehicle technologies, how will that impact diesel demand over the 30-year period? And what the graph on the right-hand side shows that there'll be significant volumes of diesel in the HGV fleet right up to probably 2031 and 32. So much work needs to happen in that time frame for greenhouse gas decarbonisation. I think it's important to highlight that the market transition to zero emission tailpipe HGVs, whether that be battery electric, whether that be hydrogen fuel cell, key focus of perhaps government's transport strategy, will take time. The vehicles need to be available on the market. We need to have the infrastructure. They need to be affordable. So low carbon fuels have a critical complementary role to play in supporting fleet decarbonisation in that interim period. Zemo has done a significant amount of work on vehicle life cycle analysis. We're hoping to publish a new piece of work in the next month or two, where we've analysed a variety of different propulsion technologies, whether that be battery electric, hydrogen fuel cell, and combining that with different types of low carbon liquid fuels and gaseous fuels as well. And in terms of vehicle life cycle, we're looking at vehicle production, the in-use phase, and the end of life. And we also take into account things like battery replacement as well. So what this chart shows is the vehicle life cycle emissions for an Arctic HGV. We've looked at diesel B7, a number of different biodiesel blends. What we mean by that is FAME at B20, B100, renewable drop-in diesel, HVO, and biomethane, and battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell. Some of our assumptions here is that the HGV is running for 8 years. We've looked at the UK renewable fuels market. So the feedstocks here for the biofuels are waste-based feedstocks. And we've taken into account the decarbonisation of the electricity grid for battery electric vehicles. For the hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, for renewable hydrogen, we've assumed that's electrolytic. But what we can see here, there's a portfolio of options are really required to achieve HGV decarbonisation. There's not going to be one solution, but what I'd like to draw to your attention is the key role that low carbon fuels will play, whether that be low carbon liquid fuels like renewable diesel or biomethane. What we can see with biofuels in particular is the feedstock has a critical impact on the greenhouse gas savings. And what we can see today with biofuels such as biomethane, when they're produced from wet manure, there is a methane credit because that methane is captured from the atmosphere, and we get carbon negative life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm hoping that can really demonstrate visually the impact, the important role of low carbon fuels. Just as background, I'm sure many of you are aware of the RTFO, which has been the leading transport policy in terms of decarbonisation since around 2008, incentivising the supply of renewable fuels in the UK. That's not only a proportion of renewable fuel in conventional petrol and diesel, such as bioethanol and biodiesel, but also encouraging higher blends of fuels, whether that be B20 or biomethane. At the moment, there's about 7% of renewable fuel in our road fuels, and that needs to rise to 14.6% by volume by 2032. The RTFO encourages biomass feedstocks produced from waste and residues. There is a crop cap, so limiting those energy crops, and that becomes increasingly stricter over time. The DfT will be publishing a low carbon fuel strategy later this year, And that will cover not only biofuels, but renewable fuels of non-biological origins. So where renewable electricity is the feedstock. So for example, producing hydrogen or synthetic fuels, and it will also cover recycled carbon fuels. The strategy will be multimodal. So not only cover road fuels, but also looking at sustainable aviation fuels, looking at the maritime sector and also non-road mobile machinery. What I wanted to draw attention to today is the sustainability requirements for renewable fuels. And the UK has some of the strictest and ambitious requirements internationally, both for carbon and sustainability in terms of those feedstocks that are used to produce the fuel. And the RTFO is really looking at the whole supply chain of those renewable fuels, from the collection of the feedstocks, or whether those feedstocks are cultivated, to their transportation, production, and obviously sale to the market. Now, the RTFO sets life cycle greenhouse gas emissions thresholds. So, for example, where biofuels were produced from 2018, they have to save 50% greenhouse gas savings compared to fossil fuel. There are land use criteria, very important for protecting biodiversity, avoiding deforestation and protecting high carbon stocks. So, for example, like tropical rainforests, peatlands and wetlands as well, and ensuring that any forestry residues are from sustainable harvest sources. When we now look at new types of fuels like hydrogen that are produced from renewable electricity, that hydrogen has to be generated using new renewable energy sources, and that's called additionality as well. So there's some background in terms of the policy framework. But looking at the HGV sector today, there's a couple of fuels that I'd like to really touch on, and those are discussed in much more detail in Zemo's Renewable Fuels Guide, and that provides a range of case studies from a number of companies in the UK that have deployed renewable fuels. It talks about the environmental credentials, the operational considerations, and some of the whole life costs as well. So as of today, this data has been collated from Zemo as part of their RFAS work. We estimate that there are around 2,000 trucks running on biomethane, compressed and liquid. We also have renewable paraffinic diesel, which is a drop-in fuel. And we estimate there's to be about 4,000 HGVs running on that. There's also high blend biodiesel, so that's FAME, B20, B30, but that has to be using compatible diesel HGVs, and we estimate there's 1,000. And Zemo has produced a list of OEM manufacturer approval for high biofuel, for high blend liquid fuels, so for FAME, B20, B30, B100, and HVO as well. There are very low volumes of renewable hydrogen at the moment on the market and biopropane, but they're mainly being used for demonstration trials as well. But as of today, the biofuel supplied in HGVs are produced from 100% biomass waste feedstocks, and we're seeing quite a wide range of greenhouse gas emissions, even going to carbon negative when manure is a feedstock as well. But when those feedstocks are from waste-based materials, they're much better in terms of their greenhouse gas performance. So some of the work that Zemo's been doing has revealed that there are several hundred companies now deploying low carbon fuels. They're making commitments to science-based targets, and there's mandatory greenhouse gas reporting. So looking at that Scope 1 and Scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions, really focusing on their supply chain is becoming increasingly important. But what I'd like to also identify that low carbon fuels are, they're only impacting about 1% of the HGV fleet. So it's still a very low number, and an even lower number when you think about battery electric trucks as well. So there's a huge amount of work to do. Over the next 5 years, there's going to be a wider range of feedstocks. So at the moment, the predominant amount of feedstocks are kind of like liquid-based. We're going to see more solid-based feedstocks, agricultural waste and residues, advanced conversion processes like pyrolysis and gasification. And what we're going to see is different types of advanced fuels coming to market, like biosyngas, biosynthetic diesel, and renewable DME as well, dimethyl ether as well. So that's just some of the advanced probably fuels that are going to come to market. I'd just now like to finish off with Zemo's Renewable Fuels Assurance Scheme. This is an independent initiative that we set up about 2 years ago now, but was really addressing one of the barriers that we identified in our work, that fleet operators wanted more confidence in the renewable fuel supply chains that they were purchasing, and this was becoming very important for their sustainability strategy and making decisions on whether to adopt these fuels. So the RFAS really provides independent assurance of the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions and feedstock sustainability of different renewable fuels supplied to the UK commercial fleet market and to non-road mobile machinery. It essentially enhances the transparency and traceability of sustainable low carbon fuels sold in the downstream supply chain. And what we're doing essentially is we're working alongside the government's UK RTFO, really giving verification of that fuel being supplied all the way down the supply chain. We independently verify claims made by fuel suppliers, and I think this is very important because greenwashing and having confidence on environmental claims and environmental credentials is becoming more and more important, and there's increasing scrutiny being placed on all sorts of products and in company supply chains. So the Renewable Fuels Assurance Scheme is helping to raise that confidence. Companies that are approved under the RFAS have to demonstrate they meet the RFAS performance criteria. We work with an independent auditor that will actually audit these companies on site. When a company is approved, they issue their customers with a renewable fuel declaration. And this is very unique. It identifies the volume of the type of fuel that's been sold, the feedstocks that have been used, whether they be used cooking oil or brown grease or sewage. It identifies the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions as well, and whether that supply chain has been voluntary scheme certified. So that's much more detail in terms of that those renewable fuel supply chains that have been approved under the RTFO, and that data is proving very valuable in terms of greenhouse gas reporting. So just to give you an infographic to sort of show you how the RFAS works, we have the supply chain here that the RTFO approves. We have biomass feedstocks that are typically internationally sourced. Those companies have to probably undergo voluntary scheme certification to demonstrate that those biomass feedstocks meet the RTFO sustainability criteria. And that proof of sustainability will move its way down the supply chain. We then have the RTFO, which really reviews all that sustainability data and grants a biofuel supplier or a trader RTFCs. But at that point, that proof of sustainability document can no longer be used further down the supply chain. And it can't be used as evidence for the end customer. And that's where the RFAS now comes into play. So what the RFAS is doing is helping to demonstrate the traceability of that sustainable low carbon fuel in the downstream supply chain after the RTFO. So we'll have, for example, UK traders approved. They will issue a declaration to their customers. If there is a distributor, they then have to be approved under the RTFO, and they can then issue renewable fuel declarations demonstrating the environmental credentials of those fuels all the way across the supply chain. So to date, I'm very pleased that we've got 23 companies approved, supplying a range of different biofuels. You can see what they are on the right-hand side. And we've got the first renewable liquid hydrogen supplier. And I think the RFAS is the first scheme in the world that has actually verified that supply chain from the point of electricity generation to that hydrogen being supplied at renewable fuel station for, I think it was for a bus depot, and that demonstrated that hydrogen supply chain met the RFAS criteria and generated and produced low carbon hydrogen. What we're seeing is various organisations are embedding a requirement for RFAS in their tendering contracts. So that's very encouraging. And all the companies that are approved under the Renewable Fuels Assurance Scheme are signposted on the RFAS website. We're doing other things over the next couple of months. We're hoping to introduce RFAS into the Republic of Ireland and hopefully other regions as well. We're also looking at developing a renewable fuel verification scheme for logistics companies to help them actually issue declarations to their customers and also see how they can potentially allocate fuel across their customer base. So hopefully that's provided you with an introduction to really set the scene before we go into the panel discussion now with Hadyn. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Gloria. Thank you for that. I didn't know there were that many fuels. Amazing technology that's appearing. Okay, so good afternoon, one all. My name is Hadyn, and I'm going to chair the panel session for the next 50 minutes or so. This panel session is going to be a case of a bunch of questions. I've got around 10 questions or so. The first question I'm going to ask of each of the various different panelists, and subsequent questions individual panelists can get involved. Just so my name is Hadyn. I chair Rutland Forums, which is a network of companies that collaborate to reduce emissions, one of which has a sector specifying logistics, hence my remit today. So what I'm going to do is first we'll get all the panelists to introduce themselves. I'll get them to sort of explain their role, so they can turn on their camera so you can see them, explain what their remit is around decarbonising HGV. So I'll start off with, he's on the screen now, Chris Ashley.
Thanks, Hadyn. Good afternoon, everybody. Just to introduce myself, so I'm Chris Ashley from the Road Haulage Association. We're a trade body representing nearly 9,000 hauliers up and down the UK. My role within the RHA is to answer this question: how do we make the switch away from diesel lorries to the net zero future we all desire, and to put on record that we definitely see low carbon fuels having a role there.
Absolutely. Great, thank you. How about Jonas?
Good afternoon, everyone. Jonas Strömberg from Scania in Sweden. Today actually standing in for my UK colleague Tanja Nietzsche, and hoping maybe to bring a little bit of the global perspective, not being so well versed on your local UK setting. Of course, at Scania we were actually the first OEM to have the science-based targets. And it means also that we have to work very intensively with greening the fleet of all our customers, because that's where over 95% of the emissions are. And we try to do so, of course, by a rather wide portfolio, as we have heard, of different selections: electric, biodiesels, HVOs, and biogas. And this is something we really need to do on the big global perspective. So happy to share the insights of that today.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, Karl, Travis Perkins.
Hi, good afternoon all. Karl Wilshaw, I'm the Fleet Director from Travis Perkins PLC. We're a group of companies. We've got probably around 1,700 trucks out there today. We've got a bit of learned experience. We started deploying HVO on the back of our strategic fleet review we undertook in 2020. Our first HVO locations went live on a small-scale pilot back in 2021. And as of today, we're about just over 40 locations now deployed with on-site bunkered HVO fuel. We're currently using it as a bit of a stepping stone. A lot of activities alongside that. We'll probably go into more depth as we go for this course. So hopefully I can share some learned experience, and hand back to you, Hadyn. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, and Philip at Refuels.
Good. There we are. Good afternoon all. Philip Fjeld, CEO and founder of CNG Fuels. A lot of you will know us as CNG Fuels. In May, we rebranded ourselves, put a new topco in place called Refuels, but I'll just talk about CNG Fuels for now, because I think that's most relevant for what we do in the UK. So we founded the company back in 2014. We develop, own, and operate very large public access bio-CNG or compressed biomethane refueling stations. We currently have 12 in operation. Each one of those can refuel between 500 to 800 trucks a day. At this point in time, we have about 1,400 trucks exclusively going through our station network. And just to put that in perspective, because I think that this is important, maybe just to frame the discussion slightly. So the company's 9 years old, well, 9.5 years old. It took us about eight to 8.5 years to get to 1,000 trucks. So going from 0 to 1,000 trucks through our network. That will get to 2,000 trucks in about 12 to 15 months beyond after that. So I think that's a good illustration of how we've now gotten to sort of launch mode, if you want, with regards to mass adoption. Why is that? Because pretty much all of our customers, existing or future customers, the ones that will have trucks on order that will be delivered in 3, 6, 9, 12 months, whatever, have got very ambitious decarbonisation targets. We all know about net zero for 2050 for UK as a whole. The vast majority of our customers want to be net zero by 2030 for long haul transportation, some in 2028, some 50% by 2025, and some 100% by 2035. So the only way they can get there, in our humble opinion today, is to use low carbon fuels, biofuels. And I think that's just to set the scene slightly, and I look forward to a good discussion in a bit.
Great, thank you very much. And Nick Head.
Thank you, Hadyn. Thanks everybody for inviting to the actual call. I'm looking forward to the discussion. XPO, my role is Head of Sustainability. I've been in position for about 2 years. XPO has been on the renewable fuels and alternative fuels roadmap for about the last 2 years. We've deployed quite a bit of LNG within our fleet, so around about 100 vehicles run on LNG. But in the last year or so, we've been moving heavily into HVO space, and we run around about 250 trucks in that space at the moment. And we certainly see, given where the challenges sit with the technology still at the moment, that the alternative fuels and the biofuels in particular will have a role for a longer period of time than we initially thought, certainly out for about another 10 years. But I'm happy to have the debate and discuss what that means going forward.
Great, thank you very much, Nick. Right, okay, our first question is all around the opportunities. And the question is, what are the immediate opportunities to decarbonise HGV fleets using low carbon fuels over the next decade, and what specifically are the front runners of the fuels that we're talking about? So what are those immediate opportunities? I'll start off with Jonas.
Thank you, Hadyn. Well, I mean, just to put it in perspective, I mean, if we should follow the Paris Agreement agenda, we basically need to halve the CO2 emissions every decade. So it's quite the task, and then we really need all of these different options that we have talked about. And from our perspective, we see that you have to look at different solutions for different applications, basically. And we see, of course, electrification starting to kick off, but not at the pace we would need. We still have a possibility to run some electrified trucks and buses, of course, but more for the easier applications right now. So short term, looking at maybe even 10 or even 20 years ahead, we think that the biodiesels and the HVOs is a great solution, particularly for the rolling and existing fleets where you can replace it in much of that immediately. If you are looking for really high CO2 reductions quickly, I think biomethane is probably by far the best solution. Very, very often we see that you get really the most CO2 for your money spent if you use the biomethane solution. So I think you have a number of options, and normally we can find a good option for each transport application. And we also try to make them as competitive as possible in the cost per kilometer, of course. So you have to be selective.
So is that how it's going to work? Are fuels going to be destined more for specific kind of transportation sources? That what you're saying? It's going to be along a tier like that. So if you are long haul, you'll do more of this. The likely is that what we're saying? And there are going to be categories like that.
Yeah, I mean, at least for the early decades here, I think it's got to be very much a focus on the liquid biofuels for the heavier and the more tough applications, and the biomethane as well. Now, when we have the liquid biomethane around, we can reach the same range basically for biomethane as we can for a liquid fuel. Okay. Which is then very challenging. And then, I mean, as we come along, it will be possible to electrify in some years to come, also the heavier applications. But that takes time.
Yeah. Okay. I see Philip nodding away. What's your take on this?
I'll just echo what Jonas is saying. I mean, that's precisely what we hear from our existing customers and soon to be customers. I mean, I checked before I came online here, and you know, for the month of September, we've had 142 unique customer companies use our station network. Now, arguably some of those are running trials and they haven't got, you know, vehicles on fleet yet. The number in September of last year was 80. So why is it growing that quickly? One, because we're doing a better job of providing a station network, because of course you can't run a truck on hot air. Essentially, you need something to refuel it with. Two, I think the OEMs are also doing a better job in actually providing product and greater greater volume of product. But the third and most important one here is, and it gets back to my opening comments, is pretty much all of our customers have got ambitious targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They can't afford to wait for 10 years for some magic solution to appear. They're going to lose haulage contracts. They're not going to grow as a company. At the end of the day, they have to do something. And that forces them down really two paths today. Either it is high blend biodiesel, which essentially is HVO, or it is biomethane. Now, of course, we're supportive of biomethane because that's what we do, but we see a multi-fuel future here. This is not just one fuel is going to take the lion's share of the market, and one fuel might work better for some haulage companies, and it might work better for some others. All right, but at the end of the day, we've now reached a tipping point, I think, where both of those fuels are now really charging ahead, because the knowledge is there, the manufacturers have come to the party, and we've now got a more robust fuel supply chain, if you want, whether it's the infrastructure or it's the supply of biomethane or supply of HVO.
Right. Okay. So how does that relate to you then, Nick, in your organisation? So I'm sure you've been doing trials for one of these different fuels, and how have you selected what's best for now?
Yeah, I would definitely echo in terms of what Jonas was saying, and Philip, in terms of the structures that they pointed out, and the point on biomethane, I think from a CO2 saving perspective is a really valid point. The only thing I think I would add and then expand upon from XPO's point of view is that HVO, as it stands at the moment, is the only fuel that you can get immediate route to market and also immediate deployment. So from that perspective, as a 3PL operator where you've got a range of different operations, that's the fuel that we would push at the moment. But certainly in terms of what we've seen, we've had trials on the various different solutions that's been talked about. But certainly as that route to market and what our clients are looking for, somebody mentioned before about the immediacy of the actual targets that people are looking for us to start making progress on to help them support them. That is the initial point there that people would want us to take that step. There obviously is a barrier still in terms of HVO because there's that price premium piece that sits with it. But there's still a premium that sits with most of the other technologies too, in terms of compared to diesel. So looking at that, there's certainly from a XPO point of view, it's still more of the same in terms of pushing more on HVO. There's the client side that is coming along on that journey with us. Certain clients more so than others. But then looking at the other technologies as well as the longer term piece coming into there. And then Jonas mentioned about the very longer term, which we actually think now is slipping a bit further away than what it was in terms of the EV space and certainly the hydrogen. We don't really see that as being a mass scale deployment anytime this side of 2030. So from that perspective, to make that kind of a change and transition, it is the alternative fuels and the bioliquid fuels in particular at this stage.
Yeah, I do sense we need to be clear that these fuels are going to be here for quite some time, and I think sometimes there's a presumption it's going to follow the electric car market where it's going to quickly switch, and that's not happening anytime soon. It's going to be here for quite some time. Now, I think your challenges are going to be echoed by Karl. I know Karl's doing trials in Travis Perkins. I mean, what's your experience?
I think you start to hear, and this non-rehearsed, you're hearing the same things echo through each of the speakers here. I think what we've done is we have, we've got fleet deployed, literally in every postcode across the UK. So when we assessed low carbon fuels back in 2020, 2021, we wanted something that we could use nationally. Some of our vehicles never get near the strategic road network and probably the infrastructure out there for probably some of the low carbon fuels you just won't be able to access for those type of vehicles on very, kind of just local deliveries. So with us, HVO, was kind of a go-to for us because it gives that national solution. But, like some have just said, the biomethane, we did assess it and we thought that was very suitable for long haul applications where we've got some vehicles doing. So what you're hearing is it kind of does tailor your operation. And basically it could be geographical as well, that where your deployment would generally lean you towards, with hopefully a lot of trusted voices kind of guiding you towards the most suited, which we definitely benefited from, speaking to some of the manufacturers and some of the fuel suppliers themselves back in those days.
Okay, thank you, Karl. Now for you, Chris, I mean, in the Road Haulage Association, you've got a very broad spectrum of organisations that are in your organisation, so just some small organisations as well as big. How are they managing these steps at the moment?
Well, I mean, I think I'm going to be echoing lots of what colleagues have already said. You know, I mean, I completely agree with Jonas. You know that. It's about having the right fuel for the right application, and I would agree that we are going down to kind of a multi-fuel route now in order to decarbonise. You know, your question, how are we addressing it? Well, we are addressing it, and we are bringing our smaller members along with us. They understand, the need, all the pressures that have been articulated about, the need to decarbonise and to show you that that you are decarbonising are very relevant and very pertinent. If I can just say just a couple of thoughts, though, additional thoughts, in addition to what colleagues have said. I mean, a theme that I'm picking up from the discussion so far is this word pragmatism. And I think, it is relevant and right that we perhaps just have a nod to what the Prime Minister said last week, where that was also a key word he's been using, pragmatism. Now, I don't want to get into the politics necessarily behind this, but I am struck that I think both the Prime Minister and the leader of the Labour Party do understand that they need to bring the public, if nothing else, along the net zero journey. And they're starting to talk my kind of language, frankly, which is how can we do this in a very practical, realistic way. And so that's why I think my final point, why we see low carbon fuels here as a trade body as a key plank in this journey towards net zero. It is a very practical and accessible option, as I think Nick said, that we can ready deploy now to start decarbonising the fleets, whilst we grapple with some quite tricky and thorny technical challenges to get sort of the battery and hydrogen vehicles onto our roads in due course. So hopefully that gives a sense of where we sit and how we're looking to address this agenda.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, the next question is all around demand, which is going to flow brilliantly from what just Chris was articulating there. So that's all about where the demand's going to come from. So the question I've got for the panel is where does the panel consider demand will be generated for sustainable low carbon fuel, and in what sectors is it going to be generated? What have you got? What's your view, Philip?
Thanks. Excellent question, and of course we're sort of I shouldn't use the word cold face here because that's in a with a green audience, but I mean we see this every day, and we're in discussions with fleets every day. At the end of the day, there are very few fleets out there, probably a handful, maybe not even that, who can afford to go green and lose money long term. All right, it's not going to work. That is not a sustainable option, because they're going to run out of money and they're going to lose contracts. And all right, so the word TCO needs to come into it, and I think that's a very important element that we need to be aware of, is the total cost of ownership. Right, it's not just about what the cost of the truck is. It is about how do you get fuel into your truck, and what is the cost of the fuel, and what is the cost to maintain and run, etc., etc. So you need to look at the whole picture. And of course, at the end of the day, where we see it, at least for biomethane, but I think also for HVO, you want to go after the big emitters first. And of course, that is the Arctic sector. Of course, if you're a fleet operator and you don't operate Arctics, I get it, all right? But what we're seeing our customer base doing is they want to go after the big emitters first. And of course, an Arctic that runs on your regular B7 blend of diesel emits 120 to 140 tons, 110, depending on mileage every year. All right. A rigid, of course, does considerably less depending on mileage, and so on and so forth. So where we see demand coming from, I'm speaking for biomethane here, but I think probably HVO is to some extent in the same category, but I'll let the HVO people speak for that. But where we see demand coming from for biomethane, it's 90-95% Arctics, and it's a high mileage Arctics, the ones that do 100, 110, 120, 150,000 miles a year. Why? Because that's the big emitting one, and that's also where your TCO works best. So that's what we see. It will probably change over time, but here and now for the next 3, 4, 5 years, it's about TCO, and it's about where do you get your maximum bang for your buck, basically.
Okay, so what kind of organisations are we talking about? Are you talking about more like it's the trunking for retail? Is that what is that going to be the bulk of the drive in this, or is it going to be other sectors? Where's the key kind of customers going to come from?
We've been doing this for 9 and a bit years now, right? It started out, well-known fact, John Lewis Partnership is a large customer of ours. Since then, we've attracted almost every supermarket out there. So the food retail sector has been early in this. Then you've got parcel delivery, the Amazons of the world, the Everys, the Royal Mails, etc. Yeah. Another one, because you're largely pulling air, all right, or large parcels. But in the last year and a half, we've really seen this sort of move into almost every single sector. We've got people looking at general haulage, heavy 6x2 general haulage stuff that I thought would come later on, but it's now happening. So I would say we're not any longer just looking at food retail and maybe parcel deliveries and some of the other logistics companies. It's now a much broader push or much broader demand pull from the sector. Why? Because a lot of our customers are going in, they're tendering for work, they have to provide a green solution. If not, they're not going to get the work. And right. That's now just no longer for the big PLCs they're tendering, it's also for different contracts.
Okay, so it's the people they're serving, the customers they're providing are really pushing the agenda for them. Okay.
Yes.
Chris, what's your take from the Road Haulage Association?
I don't disagree with what Philip said. It's about the high emitters. That's where the demand will come from. But I think, rather than try and sort of categorize this in terms of, particular industry sectors, I think, we have to categorize it by operation. It really depends on your operation. And that will then, determine the appropriate fuel type. So, in terms of the operations, yes, of course, long haul is the obvious one there. Anybody engaged in that. But I guess also anything which has a particularly intense energy demand, like refrigerated transport as well, potentially there. Yeah. So as I say, I think it very much depends on your operation as to where that demand will come.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, look, the next question in a route is all around alignment and how low carbon fuels fit alongside the other alternatives of zero emission propulsion technologies. And so the question is, are low carbon fuels a distraction or are they complementary to our decarbonisation solution? Now, I think Chris has actually touched on that already, actually. In fairness, he's already touched on that already. But let's go to Philip. You're shaking your head there. Tell me, what's your view?
Yeah, I laugh when I hear
it's just a question.
No, I know, not from you, but we hear it sometimes from other people in the industry. Maybe policymakers take that view. It couldn't be further from the truth. First of all, fleets think about how long do they run a vehicle for, right? It's 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, depending on who you are. Maybe a bit shorter, maybe a bit longer, but let's use 5 years as average, all right? If the ban on non-zero tailpipe vehicles stand, it's going to be 2035 for rigids and 2040 for Arctics. We can, there's a big question whether it will stand, but let's park that because we don't want to get into politics. Now, if you're looking to decarbonize today and you need to be net zero by 2030 because that's what your board and your shareholders have told you, then you can't wait. You need to go and do something. And ultimately, you're on a journey. All right, and you're on a journey. If you go out and order a truck today, and you're going to run it on, biomethane, because of course you need a dedicated gas truck to do that. For diesel, for HVO, you can use a regular diesel truck. Dedicated CNG truck, and you keep it for 5 years, you're in 2028. You've got 2 or 3, life cycles, if you want, of a vehicle before you're even getting close to 2040 for an Arctic. So I think it's a complete, red herring. It has nothing to do with what we're doing. On the contrary, biofuels today are critical for fleets to move from running on fossil energy to going to something that's green and sustainable. And along that journey, that will just move them up the learning curve for whatever comes next without sitting on their hands. And as I said previously, they have no alternative. So for me, it's a bit sort of people sitting in an echo chamber saying, well, yeah, 2035, 2040, sure, but fleets aren't going to do nothing between now and then because they have to. They have an alternative. So anyway, it's just my 2 cents on. I think it's a bit of a silly discussion to have sometimes with policymakers and others because they've misunderstood the whole landscape and what companies need to do today in the next 5 years, 10 years.
I suppose they're making a habit of aligning it to the behaviour with cars, and as much as it's sensible to align aircraft with cars, it's equally illogical. So, Nick, what's your take on this?
Well, I haven't paid Philip at all. He's pretty much summed up every single point that I was going to make. But what I would say is, that point around we have to take action as large 3PLs or dedicated fleet operators or whatever it is. We can't sit and wait. As I mentioned at the start, we don't see EV or hydrogen at mass scale for the heavy end of the fleet being ready before 2030. So we need to be doing things now. Fortunately, we haven't said 2030 is our carbon neutral point. So, we've got a bit more time from that. But that point that Philip made around the leasing cycles for the vehicles, 5 years, 7 years for a rigid, whatever it is, that's not a long period of time. We need to make a decision now if we're going to look at EV on the next leasing cycle. There's nothing there for us to be able to do that. So we can't do that at the moment. So we have to go heavy on other options. And I think the future for alternative fuels, particularly the biofuels, is going to be a lot longer than the government think it's going to be. And if you go back to Gloria's graph at the start, that decarbonisation piece, I think that the renewable fuels are going to have a big element of that. And I suppose it's a pragmatic choice. Well, I suppose it's one to throw out to the rest of the audience. Is it reasonable to expect us to be able to decarbonise to zero tailpipe, or can we get 90% of the way there and then make progress on that further down the line? It's that kind of questions that we need to be asking. Pragmatically, somebody mentioned it before, pragmatism, but I think that's a key point for the sector.
Absolutely right. I mean, if I can steal a statement of somebody who's put in the chat box, it's every ton of carbon not emitted today is exponentially better than waiting for battery electric vehicles or hydrogen. I think we'd all agree with that. Jonas, what's your view on this?
Well, of course, we would love as a manufacturer to have only one technology to supply. That's no secret. We have been supplying diesel for a long time, but this is, of course, not possible. And we know in the long game, electrification will win. It will take a long time, but it is a very, very efficient way of operating. So we know this will win. But the customers today, and I would say, fortunately, many of our customers, they actually have they are looking at real well-to-wheel emission cuts because they use science-based targets and similar. So in this way, often the customers are way ahead of the decision makers that tend to get stuck on tailpipe legislation and tailpipe policy, which we think is that's a bit sad, unfortunately. So just to put it in perspective, we have done a similar analysis to what you saw that Gloria showed earlier here in her diagram. Even if we have the most positive development of introduction of new electric vehicle sales, which would be maybe 50% in 2030, which it's not the ramp that we are on today, but even just to give the most positive case, we would still then have 90% of the rolling fleet in 2030 being powered by combustion engines. Right. And if that's 10% that were electric, they will have on average maybe a 50% CO2 reduction if you look at the average European electricity mix. So that would mean 5% emission cuts in 2030 by electrification alone. So then you know that we will need to apply all these other solutions as well. And it's not a distraction, it's just the responsibility we have to face up to the Paris Agreement. So it's not a distraction.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Well, which leads me on beautifully. The next question really is in regard to what is the impact, especially when it comes around to policy, at the end of new ICE sales? What is and the use of low carbon fuels? I mean, what is the long-term perspective, and how did you anticipate the impact of electric ICE vehicles being sold is going to have on you? It's going to be surely quite difficult. Chris, what's your view on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, without wishing to get drawn into politics, like what the Prime Minister said last week and how that now translates into policy, I think is really, really crucial. Because, I mean, from our perspective, having the ICE sales in place absolutely is right, in order to focus the investment needed, to bring down costs ultimately of this transition. But I think what's been missing from the debate actually is how the activity that sits under those targets is managed. so that it's managed in a way that is effective and is practical and actually keeps the economy running. Because again, just want to make the point that, you know, the RHA's approach to all of this has always been, our particular selling point is a whole United Kingdom approach. Actually, how do we ensure all parts of the economy, all the sectors that our members serve, can keep running? And when you look at it from that perspective, you see the gaps, you know, in how electric and hydrogen can cover the country. That's why low carbon fuels is this crucial interim fuel to ensure everything can keep going. So back to my point about the pragmatism and how you manage this, you know, I think there needs to be a discussion with government, and we're on record with this, to say about exemptions, potentially to the phase out dates. What those exemptions look like and how it can be regulated, that all needs to happen. But I think if there's an understanding that there will always be some very hard to decarbonise use cases that may not necessarily meet these deadlines, we need to think, you know, seriously, okay, how can we manage them as part of this transition to net zero?
Okay, but an exemption with using low carbon fuel sounds pretty fine, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. So,
yeah.
sorry, and you prompt me to make the other point, and I'm conscious of looking at the list of people that we do have colleagues from government here. You know, it's been mentioned before, low carbon fuel strategy. Please, can we have this published? Because actually, you know, my appeal to government colleagues, and I know we work closely together, but actually the government does need to declare its hand on how it sees the use of low carbon fuels in road transport, and to provide that clarity so that we understand where the government sits. It will be supported in regulation going forwards. That's all very helpful.
Thank you for that, Chris. Yes, I do sense there's quite a bit of frustration around lack of clarity. I hear this from my experiences with dealing with all the forums about, I think the whole government in many different areas is currently unclear about a sense of direction and a sense of confusion in many ways. We're looking for a bit more certainty. Gloria, you've got a question raised.
Yeah, I think it's a good time now just to bring in one or two questions from the audience. So the first question is, what does the panel think are the main barriers to faster adoption? Is it price? Is it availability? Is it recognitions of the carbon savings? Especially in terms of sort of policymakers as well. Okay,
should we kick off with Karl? What's your take on that?
So for faster adoption, I think you kind of just touched on it in that previous session. I think the absence of a low carbon fuel strategy, I think it's something that we could have moved quicker with that certainty if that strategy would have been there. I think initially it was due to be 2022. I think we supported and contributed into the sessions, but then it's gone quiet, and there's probably nothing wrong with it going quiet if you know why it's gone quiet. So I think if we've just been kind of the absence of it, we're updated to kind of, you know, where it's gone. But like I say, in our experience, we could have moved quicker, we could have accelerated our use because we could guide our long-term investments here. But say the absence of it, you're just kind of pausing a bit to think, you know, is something materially going to change here? And again, I use that word of absence and kind of not knowing, because that probably drives the anxiety, because you just don't know nothing. If you've got a bit of certainty, even if it's being delayed for a reason, we kind of got that information to work with. Like we all know, we guide our decisions through information. A lack of information, yeah, please, let's have it.
Philip, I mean, you must be speaking to lots of customers, and there must be some nervousness or issues. What are the barriers they see?
Both the two general ones that we see is TCO. I mentioned that previously. Of course, Gloria mentioned price. That of course feeds into the TCO. Whether your vehicles are more expensive or your fuel's more expensive or your fuel is cheaper, all of that is a very important part, because, as I say, there's no one out there that on mass adoption scale, and I'm not here talking about someone doing 5% of their fleet, but someone doing 95% of the fleet, they can't afford to do that if it costs a lot more than your baseline operations today. Certainly not without passing on to customers, and I don't believe that necessarily all the end users are there today to pick up that bill. Second point is infrastructure. Now that's maybe lesser of an issue for HVO. HVO, of course, has maybe greater problems with the cost currently. But for biomethane, and particularly for fast charging of trucks, for hydrogen in the future, which may or may not happen, infrastructure is a huge one, massive one. Now, I just want to give 30 seconds on what we see on our end. So we've got a land team of 5 people that does one thing only. That is go out and, night and day, secure land. Trying to develop something in the UK, infrastructure-wise, Jonas might not appreciate this, but I'm sure most of you who are on this call are in the UK, is a nightmare, all right? It can take us 2 years to negotiate with the landowner, or 1 to 2 years to negotiate with the landowner. Then you need to do your surveys, which takes you 6 to 12 months. Then you submit a planning application, which should take you 12, 14, 16 weeks, takes you a year. Then you need to discharge conditions, takes you 3 months, 6 months, and then you've got eight months of building. And then you need to deal, then you've got the joy of dealing with the DNOs and the GDNs to get a gas connection and an electrical connection, if you can get even a minimum extra capacity on the electrical grid. Now, when you put all of this together, if one of you on here today, Nick, from XPO, comes to me and says, comes to me and says, I would like you to build a public access station in this and this location. The fastest we can do it is 3 years, most realistically 4 to 5 years. So anyone who thinks that this country is going to have 300 public access hydrogen stations for trucks by 2035 or 2040, or fast charging for trucks in that time frame, I honestly don't know what part of the country they see that we're missing, because I'd love for them to come and work for us so they can tell us how this is going to be done. So that is the other big issue here, which is infrastructure. It's not just for the biofuel sector. It's also why I believe that the non-zero tailpipe ban from 35 to 40 onwards just can't be delivered, because we can't get the energy vector delivery system in place.
Can I just, sorry, honest, is there, from your view, is it just unnecessary bureaucracy, or is it genuine reasons why it takes so long? I mean, it sounds extraordinary length. I would have given up with half of it. I mean,
our infrastructure is super benign, all right? We don't have any dealings with the EA. We don't have any dealings with the HSE. We don't have any noise pollution, no sound pollution, no pollution to ground. A CNG station has never been turned down by planners. There's nothing wrong about what we do. There's nothing complicated about what we do. But when you throw in traffic movements, NEWT surveys, BAT surveys, planning authorities that don't seem to work anymore, because I don't know where they are, you throw in dealing with the electrical connection, gas connection, etc., etc., etc. It is just an endless process that is extremely frustrating, and we're good at it. We are good compared to lots of others, but even we struggle. So how do you fix that? I don't know. You would have to fundamentally tear up the planning system. You'd have to fundamentally change how the GDNs and the DNOs provide electricity and gas to a site, and so on and so forth. Is any government going to do that? Probably not.
Okay, but we're at a major point of transition, and we're trying to drive huge shift in our nation. It's time for a call to action, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Gloria, you said there were 2 questions.
They've sort of been answered in the chat. There was a question related to the RFAS, asking about ISCC document. Once the proof of sustainability has been used as evidence for a national incentive, so for example, like the RTFO, it cannot be passed down to the customer. That's what the benefit of the RFAS is providing that chain of custody evidence lower down the supply chain. I'm not aware of any other scheme in Europe that provides that mechanism, hence an opportunity for RFAS to go worldwide one day. Hope that helps.
Okay, thank you. And that leads very well into the next question. Is all on the RFAS. Or RFAS, as I call it. So what role has the RFAS got in raising confidence in the supply of sustainable low carbon fuels? So how does it help you in retaining your confidence, especially where it comes from? So Karl, Travis Perkins, obviously you've been looking at HVO. How has it helped you?
Yeah, cool, blimey. Yeah, back in 2021, I was, I'll just make sure it's off mute. Yeah, so back in 2021, I think this was what I would call a guiding light. And we spoke to those fuel providers back then. It was something that was signposted. So we obviously went and had a look at it, gained a bit more information, and it became part of our contractual to supply our fuel into us. The REFAS is very important to us. One, it gives the credibility that we know that fuel is being supplied and the sustainably sourced, and some of the things Gloria's already spoke about and going back over it, but it's that confidence. It's kind of in the title, isn't it? Assurance. So we get our certification come through. It documents the fuel that's been supplied. It gives us a declaration of the kind of the feedstock, etc., where it's come from, the well-to-wheel greenhouse gas. So we can use it in our carbon reporting for our fleet. You know what benefits it's had on carbon. So it's all kind of evidence-based for us, and takes that as an operator, as a buyer, kind of takes that all away from us. I've also, first time I read one, I had to work out what UCO was, and I was scratching my head, then realised it was used cooking oil. So you do get to learn a bit along the way. So yeah, for us it was a guiding light, and it's such an important part of our framework on our supply of HVO.
Well, I sense, I mean, across the whole sustainability agenda, transparency is one of the buzzwords of now, whether it be HVO, whether it be electricity, whether it be a whole range of different things. And that's probably no bad thing, because it ensures we're doing what's right for the outcome. Have you got a view on this, Philip? Do you know? I mean,
we were probably not 100% objective here, because we were one of the early companies, and I think we worked with Gloria back in the day. And I always take the chance whenever I can to say thank you to Gloria for having pushed this through the Zemo system to get RFAS up and running. I know it was difficult to do back in the day, but I see great benefits in having it. And you know, greenwashing is a genuine problem out there. And I think if we as an industry don't sort of tackle that head on, then we risk here undermining what we're all trying to do. And you only need one or two rotten apples, and unfortunately, for this sort of to really dent confidence in the industry. And I think that's where what Gloria's put together and Zemo put together is so valuable, because it gives this really credible stamp. Whilst we all know that, you know, everything from you know, green electricity hasn't always been green, or maybe been double counted, etc., etc. So for me, it's a must, and I'm glad it's now truly taking off, because as I say, we collectively on this call would have a huge issue here if we had a certain amount of rotten apples amongst us, because it would just dent the confidence of everyone. Absolutely right. Okay, thank you for that. Right, I mean, we're going to move on to sort of our ambition now as a country, because I'm conscious we haven't got that much time left. But from your views, is the UK ambitious enough in its low carbon fuel policy? I mean, Chris, what's your view? I mean, you've been quite clear about our pragmatic approach. Maybe you know, are we ambitious enough?
Not in road transport, I would suggest. I think, you know, the government has been ambitious, certainly in other transport modes like aviation and maritime, you know, where, you know, that there are recognised difficulties, again, practical difficulties, you know, to decarbonise those sectors. So in that sense, the government's, you know, to be commended, you know, in terms of its ambition for low carbon fuels.
The other sectors.
For the other sectors, it's this stumbling block of the road transport. And, you know, I've seen a couple of comments, you know, in the chat, you know, which I have to say resonate with me. You know, the fixation on zero emission to the exclusion of everything else, I'm not sure is particularly helpful. Hence why we need this pragmatic approach. Can I just make a very, very quick point just in relation to the last one, which I think is quite crucial about the RFAS. You know, from an operator perspective, actually, I think what we're looking for is to try and take some of the anxiety out of our future investment decisions. Okay, now I've made the point already about low carbon fuels and you know, its low carbon fuel strategy and our wish to see road transport in there. That's one aspect of this. But the other aspect is the RFAS, which is hugely welcome, because, you know, if it takes the anxiety out for the operator, out of, you know, this question, are they procuring a sustainable low carbon fuel? That's enormously helpful and beneficial, and that's why, you know, that this initiative from Zemo is so welcome going forwards.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Now, in discussing about whether we're ambitious enough, there is a question about whether other countries are doing better than us, and I wonder if Jonas has got a view on this. You know, what lessons can we learn from other countries across Europe, and what are they doing that we could learn from to accelerate our activity?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, there are both good and bad examples you can learn from. You learn equally much from bad ones, I think. Of course, I have to mention a bit from Sweden, since we are right now the country in the world with the highest share of renewables in the transport sector. We are on 1/3 of the transport sector is powered by some sort of renewable energy right now. And it has been, not everything has been right here for sure, but it's been a long-term focus on actually paying a price on CO2. So we had the CO2 tax introduced already in the 70s, and that has really helped to decarbonize the whole energy system. So you basically divided the energy tax into a CO2 part and one tax on the energy contents as such, and that's been really helpful. We see other markets doing that. It's easier to have an uptake, I think. Speaking about the biogas, we have had for a long time a ban on putting organic waste on landfill, which means that we have now 0 landfill and all organic waste actually going into producing biomethane. That also means that we have 99% biomethane in our gas grid right now, and we see this throughout the Scandinavian countries, I should say. So, I mean, progressive policy work on the waste side is really helping to put really good low carbon sourcing of waste into the system and turning it into fuels, I think. And then, of course, parallel support, I think, both to actually vehicles, to infrastructure, and to the energy, which we have seen there have been incentives in parallel working on all those three. Then we've had big successes as well, I would say. And then I think the key has been mentioned many times is really to get into a real well-to-wheel focus when it comes to reducing CO2, and not to get stuck on certain technologies or tailpipe focus. I think this is also a key where we see success, and that's where we have both good and bad learnings, particularly from Europe.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that. So it sort of concludes with the nub of the last question, the key thing around market intervention, and what is required for low carbon fuels to develop at scale? What do we need to sort of fire the market to stimulate wider option across all our HGV fleet? So what is it we need to make this happen? What are the top opportunities? Nick, we'll start with yourself.
Yeah, sorry, I'm actually at a live event, so there's a bit of disturbance. So from my perspective, I see that the low carbon fuel strategy would be a critical starting point. But as Jonas and everybody else has said on the call, takeaway is this fixation with end of tailpipe. That would be a real big assistance for us. You know, let's make some steps and then let's progress towards that. You know, in a reasonable way. Don't use it as an excuse for dragging your heels, but let's.
But we're not dragging our heels, are we? It's just a
no.
I think that's what the thing is. It's yeah. Okay. So in many ways, we're tripping ourselves over by that obsession with zero tailpipe. Okay, good point. Karl, what's your view?
Broken record here. I think we need a low carbon fuel strategy as soon as we can, because I think that kind of unlocks some of the things we spoke about the circular economy. So infrastructure, people can probably start that investment, and the infrastructure can grow around that strategy. Treasury, fiscal support, where cost is a barrier. So, you know, the fuel duty being applied, you know, the consideration, hopefully that may come in a low carbon fuel. I just think just collaboration, something I've seen that is starting to happen only probably the past 6 months, where industry is talking at the right levels, and they're starting to get a better understanding what we kind of need in road transport, some of our barriers. So I think it's that word collaboration as well, because it has started, and we must not detract the importance of that as we go into this kind of new venture. You know, it's got to be a partnership, you know, so it fits.
So anyway, it's a collaboration with business and government, not necessarily absolutely right.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. And Chris, I mean, obviously this is your bread and butter, collaborating with governments. I mean, what do you think market interventions are required?
Yeah, nothing really much to add to what's already been said, actually. And I mean, I think, you know, a critical barrier right now is the cost of HVO, for example, relative to diesel. So any sort of fuel duties subsidy or rebate that the government can consider for that to incentivize uptake has to be welcome. I think just my additional point I would make, it is about mindset change. I think actually it's about sort of, I think, just, you know, systemically, from our perspective anyway, having this clear understanding that low carbon fuels does have a key role to play, And I think we need to, you know, grasp the nettle, or certainly embrace the opportunities that low carbon fuels offer. You know, for all this, you know, the reasons that we've been discussing today, it's this very practical, pragmatic. Here is actually an obvious way we can start decarbonising now. Why can't we embrace it?
I think that's a fantastic conclusion. Frankly, thank you very much. I think absolutely right. I mean, I'm conscious that I've probably gone slightly over time, but thank you all very much, gentlemen, for your comments. Thank you for contributing to this discussion. I know Gloria is going to take over now and speak to us in the last few minutes.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Hadyn. Thank you to all our speakers. I'd just like to say that a lot of the comments that have come back today are really useful. We have close engagement with DFT. So from Zemo's perspective, we're going to summarise those sort of like headline discussion topics that we've had and that feedback, and present that to government. And I think that's quite important in that ongoing discussion that we have about informing and influencing policy. Zemo will be running some more low carbon fuels workshops and webinars. So our next one's probably going to be in January time. We're also going to be running a webinar on the work that we've been doing on life cycle analysis and demonstrating the role of low carbon fuels in meeting net zero. So watch this space for further webinars. So thank you everybody for coming today. Hope you enjoyed it, and thanks again to the panel.
Thank you for having us.